Oh yes, grazie.
As I was saying to David, I can't imagine a better film to bring back in 2019. So I'm very grateful to David and to his producer, Jeremy Thomas, for having given us this wonderful restoration and the opportunity to see the film in this way. And before I open it, David, is there any detail on the cut or the work done in restoring the film that the audience should be aware of?
No, not really. I mean, it feels to me like what we created 23 years ago. I notice the sound is actually better now than it was then. It's very the metallic the metallic nature of the sound effects and the music by Howard Shore is fantastic. I really was very excited to hear it. It sounded beautiful.
And going back to, the film was screened in Cannes in 1996, and jury headed by Francis Coppola gave it a special award. But in the UK and in the United States especially, the film had quite opposite reaction. It was accused of being violent, it was accused of being pornographic. As you see, there is nothing the way you directed and imagined this film that is pornographic or violent. Why do you think it hit the audience, the critics in particular, this? It's simultaneous. Oh yeah.
Very good. Yeah, well, I was very surprised at the extreme reaction to the film because when I made the movie, the book was already 20 years old by Ballard. It was an accepted part of Ballard's work, and I really didn't think that people would be so shocked by it or upset by it. Really, I mean, it was to me, a very strange, interesting examination of the strange pathology of technology, sort of the sexual pathology of technology, and I was really surprised that when we screened it at Cannes. I mean, actually, Gilles Jacob, who was the director of the festival then, said to me he wanted to program the film in the middle of the festival so it would go off like a bomb in the middle of the festival. And I said, I'm sure that you won't have a reaction like that. But he was right. People went bananas. They went crazy. The journalists were insane. They wanted to kill us, really, actually.
I think that one of the most thing that hit me with the film at the time, and even more rewatching it, is, and I find it very moving, is the lack of moral judgment. It's an observation of this love story, I think, and so there is no push towards the audience, what's good or what's bad, and I think that's what's probably so scary to
yes,
people.
I mean, this is. You have to understand, this is my interpretation of Ballard's vision. Was not my vision, but I absorbed it so that I could interpret it cinematically. It was actually Jeremy who mentioned the book to me and said that I should read it. And I found it very difficult to read. And I only read some of it, and I put it away. It was because, really, in a way, what you're saying, it was very clinical, very medical, very analytical. It wasn't really exactly passionate, and the emotions in it were very strange. And then, it might have been a year later, I picked the book up again and read it, and then I understood it. And then I said to Jeremy, I think we should make the movie after all. He had suggested it at the beginning, and I said no, but then I said yes. And that's because it took a while for me to understand that, in a way, Ballard was anticipating the future of technology as it affected society. And then he took that understanding of future technology and set it in the present, which was then 1973. So in a way, here you see people in the present, but with a future psychology, a sort of pathology, a pathological psychology.
And I think thematically connects with all your other work in this, the idea of people's trying to communicate with each other, and this longing for communicating that it's actually impossible, and like humankind, the ultimate solitude?
Well, in an attempt to use the technology that exists in order to subvert the inhibitions that there are for communication, and to try and come underneath the technology, to come underneath the machinery. Of course, the technology in the movie is very old-fashioned. It's very mechanical, very machine-like. We have our own version of it now with iPhones and with the internet and so on. But the basics are still there. The difficulty of communication, even as there seems to be so many more ways to communicate, and yet we aren't managing to communicate it. It's a conundrum.
The film was defined as very cool. Cool is a word that was often used to describe the film. Cold, passionless. I find it quite the opposite, and it's a crescendo. And the last scene, in fact, is a scene that is incredibly passionate. But passion runs through the film.
I agree with you. I think there's a sort of standardized version of passion or an obsession in pop culture that people accept as real, but I can tell you from my own experience, there's a depth of passion that involves aging and death and despair and loss and all kinds of things that are not the normal kind of romantic understanding of what passion is. And I think the movie really does manage to touch on that. Yeah.
Formally speaking, it's the anti-action film. It's a film about car crashes, and it's shot in a completely different way. Can you talk a little bit about the visual design?
Yeah, I think the action sequences are great. Really, I was very impressed. We didn't have a big budget, but the idea was to make it very well, as Vaughn says. It's sort of messy and scratchy and dirty, Prophecy is messy and dirty. And I think the action scenes here are messy and dirty. They're clumsy, and things are bumping into each other and clanking, and there's not really very spectacular in some ways. And it's much more, in a strange way, even in a film that you wouldn't think of as realistic. These action scenes are extremely realistic.
And before I open it to you, I promise I will. I want to go back a little bit to the sound design and the way you mentioned before how the soundtrack, the music and the noise of the car crashes and the dialogue, it's all meshed into one thing.
Well, part of that comes from Howard Shore's brilliant score. I mean, it really is a very unusual, unique music score, where he used 6 electric guitars as the primary orchestra. I've never heard anything like that before, and the music then inspired the opening credits, which are very metallic, and of course, the book too is obsessed with metalness. And the interaction between metal and human flesh. And so that was the key to many things in the movie, visual and sound design as well.
Question. There.
Firstly, congratulations on the restoration. It is wonderful, and I agree with you with the sound design. My question, and I'll try and keep this short. The thing that strikes me about your films is that they are wonderfully theoretical and philosophical, and you balance that fine line between being pretentious or overly explanation, but then at the same time, they're really quite sensual, and they're exploitive, but they're completely respectful at the same time to what is being shown on the screen. And my question for you is, how do you balance and master this fine line? Is there anything on a film set where you pull yourself back and say, no, I won't do this, it doesn't match the tone of my film? Or do you just follow your instinct, do you follow your gut? Because I think you are exceptionally talented, you have so much talent when it comes to balancing theory and affect and senses.
Yeah, your work is made of exceptional balance between theory, theoretical thought, and sense and sensual images. And how do you strike that balance in the film?
Well, I mean that comes with the writing. Really, it begins with the writing. You conceptualize something, but now you have to realize it in characters, and in dialogue, and in imagery. I mean, it's really. That's the amazing alchemy that happens. Or if you fail, then it doesn't happen. But it's to me the wonderful thing about cinema is that there are so many levels of things that you have to deal with, and to integrate them all. Is a lifetime study, and in a way I really can't really describe the process, but it does begin with the writing.
And it starts as a concept, and then you articulate.
Yes.
Is that question? Here. Il microfono qua.
Thanks and congratulations. I have two rapid questions. One from my friend that can be here, and he was asking if your film Crash was inspired in part by pornographic movies and snuff movies, in particular for what concerns the montage, the cutting of the scenes and things like that. And the second question is, I think that the themes of crashes and things like that were also a sort of I think feeling of that time, maybe this time, because also in 1997 was OK Computer by Radio was released, and there was a strong sense of our body, our weakness in bodies, and crashes, motor crashes, and things like that. And I think that what is your take about that period, and how crashes were, I think, inspired art, movies, and music? Those two questions. Thanks.
The first one was like, how does your film relate to porn, essentially, to pornographic film and snuff film, if there is any relationship, and if there were any sort of inspiration?
No, I really don't. I mean, pornography, the word pornography means writings about prostitutes. Literally, that's what it means. And pornography is meant to sexually stimulate people. That's its purpose. So I would say, in that sense, this is not a pornographic film, because that was not its purpose. On the other hand, if you find yourself being sexually aroused by the film, that's okay. I make no judgment. And the second question?
La seconda me la ripeti un attimo. It seems to him that the car crashes and were sort of in the zeitgeist of the end of the 90s, and was quoting a Radiohead album that came out in 1997, and so if the movie was also influenced by this imagery that was of the moment.
No. No, actually, I was really, the novel was written in 1972. I think it was published 73. And so I was really thinking more like the 70s and before Radiohead, you know.
But you did have, for a long time, a fascination with cars.
Oh, yes, I still have a fascination with cars. And tomorrow I go back to Monza, and I will be watching the Italian Grand Prix on the weekend. Forza Ferrari.
Up there, lassù in cima.
Hi everyone. I was wondering why you choose to let in the final scene to let them have sex out of the car instead of inside the car. Because I was thinking of the fetishism that you would like to transmit in all of the movie when they touch the car and they destroy the car. I mean, well, I was just wondering that.
Is asking if why did you allow that in the last scene for them to have sex outside of the car, because it seems that the fetish would be coherent, they would have to be inside as opposed to the outside.
Well, you know, you have to get out sometimes.
Here. Wow.
Hey, David. My question for you is, was the Atrocity exhibition, which is what Crash is based on, was that your first experience with J.G. Ballard? And how has his work affected you? Because it seems like you two are kind of comrades in arms from different periods of time. And also, what did he think of the film?
What do you mean? What did he think of which film?
What did J.G. Ballard think of Crash?
Oh, okay.
Because he was alive.
Did you
with,
get that? So it's the exhibition of the atrocity, which is a genesis of the film. It seems like you're very much in line with your imagery. And did you know Ballard before, and were you aware of his work? And what did he think of the film?
I knew of Ballard's existence, but I hadn't read anything of his until I read Crash. When we screened the film in Cannes in 1996, Ballard was there. He was sitting with us. He loved the film. And at one point, there was a journalist. You know, we were attacked by everybody. Many journalists were yelling at us and attacking us. It was great. And one of them, I think he was from Finland, I think, and he said, "This film is an atrocity. It's, you know, you took a great novel and you've just destroyed it, you've misinterpreted it." And then Ballard said, "No, it's actually better than my book." So the guy had to shut up and sit down. So, and actually, Ballard was serious. He really was he loved the movie, and he felt that it added some elements that were inherent in the book but weren't really upfront, kind of sensuality and so on. And he really loved the movie. And after our panel, we went out and we all, you know, ate and drank and had a great time. So I loved him. He was a really wonderful man. I was very sad when he died not that long ago.
Did you two discuss doing other work together? Was there anything else that you thought?
There were suggestions about doing his book High Rise, for example, but I had done one of my early movies, Shivers, took place in a high rise, so I really felt, you know, that I had done that, or my version of that, and so we never really came together on another project. But Ballard was really. He found Cannes a very exciting but overwhelming experience. He is a writer. He lives in Shepperton, which is a very quiet English town, and he said, "You know, this is a little too exciting for a writer, David," he said.
Hi. You have, of course, filmed a lot of very shocking scenes during your career. My question is, have you noticed a kind of evolution in the audience? Do you think the audience now is most difficult to shock than it was, I don't know, 40 years ago?
Shock has been an element in some of your work, and do you think the audience today is harder to shock than 20 years ago?
I must say, I have never think in terms of shocking an audience. And that's why I was so surprised at how extreme the reaction was to this movie when we first showed it. The way it feels to me is not like you know, Alfred Hitchcock liked to think that he was a puppet master, and he would manipulate the audience, and he would pull strings and make them jump and scare them and stuff. I've never felt that way about my filmmaking. I feel like I'm going on an exploration, a trip, exploring elements of the human condition, and I find things and I find them interesting and I present them to the audience, and I'm basically saying, I find this to be of some interest, and let's see what you think. So I've never really worried about whether I'm shocking the audience or not. I would worry if I was boring the audience. That would not be a good thing. But it's hard for me to say, really. You're the first audience who's seen this movie in a theater since 1996, probably. So you can tell me how you reacted. But as I say, that if people were not shocked, that would be okay as well. I'm not looking to do that. That's not my purpose.
I think that a very important feature of this movie is not only the authenticity that breaks the boredom and this illusion of having a tamed, regular traffic that actually is the paradox of safety. In order to feel safe and not to be scared, we get bored. And is a paradox of boredom and the need of thrill to break the boredom, of which part is definitely sex is a very important part of it, but it's not the only element. That there's been also the speed, the thrill of the speed and the danger of death as well. So it is the kind of a mechanism that leads to practice extreme sports. And I think it's very powerful, this movie, to show all these links to break the boredom of modern life, because modern life can be also extremely boring. So when you see the landscape of traffic, they're very monotonous. And to think the experience of the subject, that movie expresses this very well when they contemplate the traffic and they feel that is just overwhelming and it's hard to bear, really. So I think is the complexity of all these feelings and to break the patterns to achieve authenticity through the interruption of the so-called normality is very important element of this movie. That reminds me of another movie of Robert Altman, which is Shortcuts, when you see the boredom of the everyday life that is broken by accidents, the little accidents.
No.
Is that a question?
No, the question is, were you aware, to which extent you are aware of this element that is common also to Robert Altman movie, of the boredom of the normality and the need to break it and the thrill?
Well, I've seen that movie, and I've seen most of Altman's movies, but it wasn't, I didn't connect it with this.
There was not a link?
No. And I have to say that the car that I drive now is a Tesla. It is electric, it doesn't make this kind of noise, and it can drive itself. So, if everybody drives a Tesla, then you have to program in some crashes, because it's very hard to crash the Tesla.
I think we have time for one more. No, here.
Hi, vado in italiano un po' più... Okay. Una delle cose più belle del film è l'incontro tra l'immaginario di Ballard e il suo, soprattutto nel rapporto tra la carne e la macchina, qualcosa che ha a che fare col cyberpunk, di cui riguarda... Sì, il cyberpunk ci ha detto molto, però se guardiamo ad oggi, più che con la macchina andiamo nel software rispetto all'hardware. E quindi la mia domanda era se oggi poteva essere interessante per lui andare in una direzione, per i suoi prossimi film, nel contatto fra il corpo e il software invece che l'hardware.
So la ripeto forte così anche voi la sentite. Part of the beauty of the film is the contact, a meeting of yours imagery and Ballard's, and in the rapport between the flesh and the machine as hardware. And it says today the machine is mostly a computer, and if you're interested in pursuing a similar vein of exploration, while with computers as well, with software and the flesh. If you're thinking in the future to work on something like that.
Yes, I mean, I am interested in that, and I have some projects that might address some of those things that you're talking about. But it's still technology, even if it's digital, it's still technology. There's still machinery that has to be made. It's smaller, The iPhone is smaller than a car, but and yet you have Apple working on an electric car as well. So but yes, I do find that of interest, and I've been playing with computers since the 1980s. The first script I wrote on a computer was for The Fly. I was writing it in 1985. So I'm aware of what you're saying, and yes, it is of interest to me.
There is one last question from me, and as you said, you didn't expect the reaction to the film to be so violent and the animosity. And I remember I was in the States at the time already, and Ted Turner tried to block the release of the film, and succeeded for a short amount of time. Do you think something like that has? And he was an individual. It wasn't even it was him. Do you think that has influenced the perception of your work in the States, and it has affected it rather for work to come, or it didn't?
I don't think that the movie had as big an impact in the U.S. as it did in England. I mean, in England it had the most extreme impact, even when it wasn't seen. I actually did meet Ted Turner. He was in a lineup going into the Oscars, and I said, Ted, come on, you Crash. I mean, why were you so upset by Crash? But he was married to Jane Fonda at the time, and apparently they were both very shocked by the movie, and because of his control of the distributor of the movie, he was trying to suppress it. And he said, well, when kids see this movie, they'll have sex in cars. And I said, Ted, 1950s. I mean, many people of your generation were conceived in the back seat of a 1950 Ford. So this is not the first time that teenagers will have sex in cars. I really don't think that's the problem. Anyway, that was my interaction with Ted Turner.
Okay, I'm told we have no time. I want to thank David and Jeremy for being here.
Thank you. Grazie.
And